The brass bell above the corner shop door still rings in the memory of anyone who grew up poor in post-war Britain. Behind that counter sat the whole week's survival, tins, packets, and paper bags that had to stretch from Monday to Monday on whatever coins were left after the rent man called. We are counting down 25 British corner shop foods that poor families turned into a full week of meals, often on less than £1. From a single tin that fed 5 to a loaf that reappeared at every table, each one carries a quiet story of thrift, hunger, and genuine genius. Which humble item stretched the furthest of all? Let us begin the countdown with number 25. Number 25, broken biscuits. Long before sealed multi-packs, the corner shop kept a tin of broken biscuits beside the counter. The snapped and crumbled rejects sold off cheap by the quarter. For a few pence, a mother could fill a paper bag with a jumble of digestives, custard creams, and bourbons, all in pieces. Children never minded the broken edges, and that bag of fragments became the week's only sweet treat, rationed out 1 or 2 at a time after tea. The very biggest pieces were saved for Sunday. Crushed and pressed with a little melted margarine, the crumbs became the base for a tart or a fridge cake that stretched the bag even further. Oral histories from across the north recall the shopkeeper tipping the tin, the rattle of broken biscuits into the scale pan, and the small thrill of not knowing quite what you would get for your money. Number 24, pearl barley. That cloth bag of small ivory grains cost almost nothing, yet it did more work than anything else on the shelf. A handful thrown into a pot of water and bones would swell 3 or 4 times over, thickening a thin broth until it clung to the spoon. Housewives kept barley going all week, adding a fistful to whatever liquid the day produced, so Monday's watery stock became Thursday's hearty soup. The grains carried no flavor of their own, which was precisely the point. They borrowed richness from a ham bone or a scrap of mutton and turned it into bulk that filled hungry stomachs. Children remember the slippery texture, the way the barley settled at the bottom of the bowl, and the certainty that a half-empty pot could always be stretched another day with a few more grains and a kettle of hot water. Number 23, dried marrow-fat peas. Sold loose from a sack or in a stiff paper packet, marrow-fat peas came with a little tablet of bicarbonate to soften them overnight. A single bag, soaked in a bowl by the sink, would double in size by morning, ready to simmer down into thick, green, mushy peas that stretched across several days. Served hot with a splash of malt vinegar, they made a meal beside a single sausage or a slice of fried bread. Cold and set, they could be sliced. The smell of soaking peas was the smell of the working week itself, a faint earthy note that hung in scullery kitchens from one wash day to the next. For a few pence, that bag delivered protein when meat was a fortnightly luxury, and no family raised on it ever forgot the satisfying weight of a bowl of mushy peas on a cold evening. Number 22, camp coffee. That square bottle with the kilted soldier on the label was not really coffee at all, but a thick syrup of chicory and a whisper of coffee essence. For families who could never afford a tin of real ground coffee, a single bottle of camp lasted months. A teaspoon stirred into hot milk made a sweet, treacly drink that felt like luxury after a week of plain tea. Mothers also poured it into cake batter and trifle, lending a grown-up bitterness to puddings made from almost nothing. The bottle sat at the back of the cupboard, brought out for visitors as proof the household could rise to an occasion. A few pence bought weeks of small comforts, and the chicory syrup stretched so far that one bottle might see a family through an entire winter of Sunday treats. Number 21, Bovril. The little brown pot of beef extract was medicine, drink, and seasoning all at once. A teaspoon dissolved in boiling water became a warming mug that working men carried in flasks down the pit, and that mothers pressed on sniffling children as both supper and cure. The same spoonful, stirred into a pan, lifted a thin gravy or a pot of vegetable water into something that tasted of meat the family could not afford to buy. Spread thinly on bread and dripping, it added a salty depth that made plain slices feel like a proper tea. A single jar lasted weeks because so little went so far, and the corner shop always carried it within reach of the till. The smell alone, sharp and beefy, could trick an empty stomach into believing a roast was somewhere near. Number 20. Bird's custard powder. That yellow tin promised pudding even in the leanest weeks, and it asked only for milk and sugar. 2 spoonfuls whisked into hot milk produced a golden custard that turned stale cake, tinned fruit, or a handful of stewed apples into a Sunday dessert worth gathering for. Made thick, it set into layers for a trifle. Made thin, it poured over crumble in a generous yellow river. A single tin cost pennies and lasted for weeks of puddings, because a little powder went an astonishingly long way. Children watched the milk thicken on the stove, stirring so it would not catch, and learned that even on a Wednesday with the cupboard nearly bare, a hot pudding could still appear. For families with no eggs to spare, Bird's was the difference between a meal that ended in plain bread and one that ended in comfort. Number 19. Golden syrup. Lyle's green and gold tin was a staple so common it earned the nickname sunshine in a tin. A spoonful drizzled over porridge transformed grey oats into something children would eat without complaint, morning after morning, for the price of a single weekly tin. It sweetened steamed puddings, glazed the top of a cake, and could be eaten straight on bread when nothing else was going. Because syrup never spoiled, the tin sat in the pantry for weeks, dipped into a little at a time. The thick amber thread that fell from the spoon was one of the few reliable pleasures in a hard week, and mothers measured it out carefully, knowing that a single tin had to sweeten breakfasts, puddings, and the occasional treat from one shop day to the next. Number 18. A jar of jam. Cheap red jam, often more sugar and pectin than fruit, was the working family's everyday luxury. A single jar from the corner shop had to cover a whole week of teas, scraped thin across bread and margarine, so that every slice carried just a blush of sweetness. The trick was restraint. A thick layer would empty the jar by Wednesday, so children learned to accept the faint pink smear that was all that could be spared. The same jam filled the center of a sponge on Sunday, and topped a steamed roly-poly when flour and suet allowed. Oral histories recall the disappointment of reaching the bottom of the jar too soon, and the small triumph of a mother who made one jar last every breakfast and tea from Monday right through to the following shop day. Number 17. Tinned pilchards. Few tins fed a family as cheaply as pilchards in tomato sauce. The oily fish, packed whole in a soft red sauce, could be mashed onto toast for tea, folded into mashed potato for fish cakes, or stirred through pasta to stretch a single tin across 2 or 3 meals. The strong smell divided households, but the price never did. For a few pence, a tin delivered protein and oil that filled bellies when fresh fish was out of reach. Children remember the soft bones that crushed under a fork, and the bright sauce soaked up with bread, so nothing was wasted. A clever mother could turn one tin into Tuesday's tea and Thursday's supper, and the empty tin, rinsed and saved, often found a second life holding nails or buttons on the shed shelf. Number 16. A packet of jelly. That block of brightly colored cubes, broken from the packet and dissolved in hot water, was a treat that cost almost nothing and felt like a celebration. A single packet set in a bowl became Sunday pudding, and it stretched further still when sliced fruit or a little evaporated milk was folded through. Children pressed their faces to the larder door, waiting for it to set, mesmerized by the wobble. The corner shop kept every flavor, and a mother could buy one a week without straining the budget. Layered with custard and a scrap of sponge, a single packet of jelly turned the cheapest ingredients into a trifle grand enough for visitors. For pennies, jelly gave a hard week a splash of color, and the children something to look forward to that asked nothing of the meat ration. Number 15. Tinned evaporated milk. Carnation in its red and white tin was the poor family's cream, and it worked a kind of magic that fresh milk never could. Poured over tinned fruit or a slice of pie, it added richness for a fraction of the cost. Chilled overnight and whipped, it rose into soft peaks that mimicked whipped cream on a trifle. Boiled gently in the tin, it became a thick toffee for spreading. A single tin cost pennies, kept for weeks in the cupboard, and turned up in puddings, in tea, and in the children's bedtime drinks. For households without a fridge, that long life tin was insurance against the days the milkman's bill could not be met. The high milk solids made it stretch where fresh milk would have curdled or run out, and few corner shop staples earned their keep so quietly. Number 14. Tinned tomatoes. The humble tin of plum tomatoes was the foundation of 100 cheap meals. Tipped into a pan with an onion and a spoon of dripping, it became a sauce for pasta, a base for soup, or the gravy that lifted a plate of fried bread into a proper tea. A single tin stretched across the week, used a few spoonfuls at a time, bulked out with water and whatever vegetables were going soft in the rack. The bright acidity cut through stodge and made plain food taste of something. Mothers swore by a pinch of sugar or a scrape of bicarbonate to soften the sharpness of the cheapest tins. For a few pence, that red tin gave color, moisture, and flavor to meals that would otherwise have been grey, and no corner shop shelf was ever without a stack of them. Number 13. Suet. The packet of Atra shredded suet was the engine room of the post-war kitchen, the cheap fat that turned flour and water into food that truly filled. A handful mixed with flour made dumplings to swell a thin stew, a crust for a steak and kidney pudding, or the dough for a jam roly-poly that fed the whole family for the price of a few spoonfuls of jam. Because suet kept for weeks without spoiling, a single packet from the corner shop ran through stews, savory puddings, and sweet ones alike. The heft it gave a meal was the whole point. A few ounces of suet meant a pudding dense enough to send a hungry child to bed satisfied. Saturday kitchen chefs now treat suet pastry as a curiosity, but for thrifty mothers it was simply how you made a little go a very long way. Number 12. Dripping. Dripping, saved from a joint when a joint could be had, and bought by the quarter from the corner shop when it could not, was fat, flavor, and frugality in one pot. Spread on bread with a pinch of salt, it made a tea that working men remembered fondly all their lives. Spooned into a hot pan, it fried the bread, the eggs, and the leftover potatoes that became Tuesday's supper. A small pot lasted the week because it was used sparingly. A knob at a time, each scrape carrying the savory memory of meat the family rarely saw whole. The brown jelly at the bottom of the pot was prized above the pale fat, scraped onto toast as the richest mouthful of the day. For pennies, dripping gave the cheapest meals the taste of a roast that most weeks never appeared. Number 11. Margarine. Long before it was sold as a health choice, Margarine was simply what poor families used because butter was beyond them. A single block from the corner shop covered a week of bread, scraped thin so that 1/4 pound saw the household from one shop day to the next. It greased the cake tin, softened the mashed potato, and fried the morning bread. The cheaper brands were hard and pale and tasted faintly of nothing, but they did the job. And a family that could not dream of butter learned to make margarine stretch across every slice. Children grew up never knowing the difference, and the careful spreading of margarine, never too thick, became a small daily lesson in making do. The block sat wrapped in greaseproof in the larder, dipped into morning and night, the silent backbone of the working week's bread. Number 10. Loose leaf tea. The packet of loose tea was the heartbeat of the British home, and in poor households it was stretched with a thrift bordering on art. One spoonful brewed the pot, and the leaves were left in to be topped up with hot water again and again through the day, each cup weaker than the last. Nothing was thrown away while there was colour left in the leaves. A 1/4 pound packet from the corner shop had to last the week, no matter how many cups were poured, and a strong first brew for the man of the house often gave way to pale afternoon cups for everyone else. The ritual of the teapot, refilled and stewed until the leaves gave up their last, was the rhythm of every hard week, and tea was the one comfort even the poorest family refused to go without. Number 9. A bag of sugar. Sugar was sweetness, energy, and small mercy all at once, and a single bag had to do an enormous amount of work. It sweetened the endless cups of tea, the morning porridge, the Sunday pudding, and the rhubarb stewed from the bottom of the garden. In the leanest weeks, bread sprinkled with sugar was a child's pudding, and a sugar sandwich kept hunger at bay between meals. The bag was guarded, spooned out with care, because once it ran low, everything turned bitter at once. Corner shops sold it loose into blue paper bags before pre-packing arrived, weighed out by the pound. For families with little else to offer, sugar was the cheapest way to make plain food bearable, and a careful mother made a single bag stretch across every cup and bowl from Monday to Monday. Number 8. Porridge oats. The drum of rolled oats was breakfast for the entire week, and for pennies it fed a houseful every morning without fail. A handful of oats and a pan of water or watered milk made a grey, filling bowl that stuck to the ribs through a cold morning at school or down the pit. Salt for the men, a little sugar or golden syrup for the children, and the same drum carried the family from one shop day to the next. Leftover porridge was never wasted. Pressed into a tin and sliced cold, it became a slab to fry or carry to work. The smell of oats on the stove was the smell of survival itself, and few corner shop items delivered so many meals for so little. One drum, a pan, and a kettle were a week of breakfasts secured. Number 7. OXO cubes. That little foil-wrapped cube of concentrated beef stock was a tiny miracle of thrift. Crumbled into a pan of hot water, it made a savory drink that warmed a child home from school. Stirred into vegetable water, it became a soup. Dropped into a thin gravy, it gave the illusion of meat where there was none. A box of cubes cost next to nothing and lasted for weeks, because half a cube was usually enough to lift an entire pot. The trick, every mother knew, was to dissolve it first in a spoon of boiling water so no gritty bits remained. For families stretching one small joint across a week, OXO was the seasoning that made the leftovers taste fresh again. The deep, beefy smell rising from the pan could persuade the hungriest household that something far richer than water and a cube was on the way. Number 6. Tinned baked beans. The tin of beans in tomato sauce was the corner shop's great equalizer, cheap enough for any budget and filling enough to silence a houseful. On toast it was tea, stirred into mashed potato it was supper. Stretched with a little water and a chopped sausage, it became a stew that fed more mouths than the tin should allow. The sweet, faintly smoky sauce was soaked up with bread, so not a drop was wasted, and a single tin could be split across 2 plates or 2 days when money was tight. Children loved it, which made it precious to mothers who fought daily battles to get a meal eaten without complaint. For pennies a tin, beans delivered protein, warmth, and a flavor that every British child of the era could summon from memory in an instant. Few staples worked harder for the money. Number 5. Luncheon meat. The squat tin of pink luncheon meat, opened with a little key that peeled back the lid, was the centerpiece of countless cheap teas. Sliced thick and fried, it became the meat in a fry-up no butcher had supplied. Sliced thin and cold, it filled sandwiches for lunch boxes all week long. Diced into a hash with potato and onion, a single tin stretched across several meals. The salty, dense slabs carried a flavor children adored, and adults accepted as the honest price of getting by. For families who could not afford fresh ham or bacon more than rarely, the corner shop tin of luncheon meat was meat made affordable, kept in the cupboard against the lean days. A single tin, carefully sliced, turned up at breakfast in a sandwich and fried for tea, doing the work of a joint that would have cost 10 times as much. Number 4. Corned beef. The blue and gold tin shipped from Argentina was a fixture in every poor family's cupboard, the dependable meat that waited patiently for the day the purse ran empty. Diced with potato and onion into a hash, it sizzled into a filling supper. Sliced cold, it filled a sandwich. Stretched into a pie or fritters, it covered another day still. The dense pink block, prized whole from the tin, carried a sharp metallic tang that nobody confused with fresh beef, but it filled the gap that fresh beef could not. A single tin could be made to feed 5, used a few slices at a time, eked out across a week of teas. For families with no fridge and little money, corned beef was insurance against hunger, and the corner shop counter was never without a pyramid of those familiar tapered tins. Number 3. A wedge of cheddar. A small wedge of cheese from the corner shop was wealth in a paper wrapper, and it was guarded accordingly. Grated rather than sliced, a little went a remarkably long way. Melted over toast, stirred into mashed potato, or scattered sparingly across a macaroni dish to feed the whole family. The rind was never thrown out. It was dropped into a pot of soup to lend its last breath of flavor before being fished out. A quarter-pound wedge had to flavor a week of meals, so it was cut with care and counted almost slice by slice. Cheese on toast under the grill was the quickest cheap supper there was, and a sprinkle of grated cheese could lift the plainest plate of vegetables into something a child would finish. For the price of a small wedge, the corner shop sold a whole week of small, savory luxuries. Number 2. Half a dozen eggs. Eggs were the most versatile shillings worth the corner shop sold, and a careful mother could spin half a dozen across an entire week. One beaten into a Yorkshire pudding batter fed everyone around a few sausages. One stirred into a cake bound the week's only treat. One fried atop bread, and dripping was a tea in itself, and one whisked into leftover potato made cakes for the pan. Scrambled with a splash of milk, 2 eggs could be stretched across 3 plates. Nothing was wasted, not even the shells, which went to clean the pots or feed the garden. The corner shop sold them loose, settled gently into a brown paper bag, and a family learned to make each one count. For protein, for binding, for the rare pleasure of a soft-boiled egg with toast soldiers, the humble egg did more across a week than any other single item. And finally, in first place, the loaf of bread. No corner shop food was stretched harder or relied upon more completely than the daily loaf. It was breakfast as toast, lunch as a sandwich, and tea as bread and dripping or bread and jam, the constant beneath every meal of the week. Stale ends were never binned. They became bread and butter pudding, the panade that bound a meatloaf together, breadcrumbs for a topping, or fried bread to soak up the last of the fat in the pan. A damp tea towel and a low oven revived yesterday's hardened crust into something soft again. For families counting every coin, the loaf was the difference between a meal and an empty plate, the cheapest way to fill a child before school and a worker before a shift. It appeared at every table, every day, and stretched to cover the gaps that nothing else could fill. The loaf was survival itself, sliced thin and made to last. Across all 25 entries, from a bag of broken biscuits to the loaf that anchored every table, these corner shop staples tell one story above all others: the quiet genius of making a little feed a lot. Tins, packets, and paper bags became a whole week of meals in the hands of mothers who wasted nothing and counted everything. They were not luxuries. They were survival, bought a few pence at a time and stretched with care, love, and ingenuity from one shop day to the next. Which one do you remember from your own kitchen? Tell me in the comments below.